Welcome to the CouchScouts podcast. We provide league-winning analysis, advice, and tools to help you dominate your league and build a dynasty. Scout, draft, win. Here's your host, Matt Cooper.
Welcome to this special New Year's Day edition of the CouchScouts podcast, and Happy New Year to everybody that's listening. It's good to be in 2025 and excited for what the year is to bring for us with CouchScouts, but just in life. And yeah, it's always an exciting time of year. What do you guys have any New Year's resolutions that you're going to actually stick with?
To not lose to my wife twice in fantasy football championships.
The shame.
That would be a good one. That's a good one.
Mine what about you, to make sure to keep my wife retired and staying at home.
Okay.
For those
I like that
don't know, my wife was working with her two boys in daycare, and she got laid off back in November and made a decision she's just going to stay home. So
good for her, man.
Make sure I keep on crushing at work and making sure that she can stay home.
Let's go. That's awesome. I would like to eat better, which I'm sure that a lot of people listening can probably relate to that one. Probably one of the more common New Year's resolutions. But
did I tell you guys I found one of our fans on TikTok this morning? Yeah,
really?
Apparently last night, somebody, as soon as the clock struck midnight, somebody screamed, "I love Bucky Irving," to be the first one to talk about Bucky Irving in 2025. So,
okay.
Somebody beat us to the punch, guys. I hate to
I was wondering where you were going with that. But on today's episode of the CouchScouts podcast, we're not going to be talking about New Year's resolutions. We're going to be continuing our Inside the Prospect series. Today, we are going to be discussing Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri. He is listed at 5'11", 208 pounds, according to the team website. So this is we're pre-combine at the date of recording, pre-Senior Bowl, all that kind of stuff. So we don't have official measurements on anybody yet, but what we've got for Burden is 5'11", 208. He is a junior, early declare. He was a 5-star and the number 2 wide receiver in his recruiting class. And he's had a pretty good college career. I would say his true freshman season, he came in 375 receiving yards, nothing crazy. He did have 6 receiving touchdowns, was used a lot in other ways, got some carries as a rusher, was a return guy. The athleticism was on display. And then his sophomore year, it seemed like he took a huge leap as a true wide receiver. He had 86 receptions, 1,200 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns in the SEC as a sophomore. And then this year, returning for his junior season, actually took a pretty massive step backwards from a statistical standpoint. So 61 receptions, 676 receiving yards. So almost half the amount of receiving yards as he did as a sophomore. 6 receiving touchdowns, also had 9 carries for 115 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So that's just a little bit of the background from a statistical production standpoint on Luther Burden. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the tape. What did we see when we turned on the film? And so if you're new to the channel, welcome. A little bit of insight into our process. We watch at least 5 full games of all 22. That's coach's tape where you can see all 22 players on the field. So you can see the whole route. He doesn't go off screen. And you're watching every snap. So not just when he's targeted or when he makes a big catch, you're watching the good, the bad, the ugly. And we want to make observations in different areas of traits that we've seen that translates to specifically dynasty fantasy football points, because this is, at the end of the day, a dynasty fantasy football channel. So with all that being said, the first thing that we always like to talk about with a wide receiver is the release and route running. In our grading system and our metrics, we feel like if there was one trait that translates the most to future fantasy production, it's release and route running, because when you get open, you're going to earn targets. And when you earn targets, you're going to rack up PPR points. So we always start there. And so we're going to start there with Luther Burden. And we'll start with you, Rupert. What did you notice from Luther Burden as a route runner?
This was his biggest area of disappointment in my mind. I felt like he was pretty well rounded everywhere else, and this was his weak spot. He's described as a slot player, and he pretty much wound up in the slot all the time. He was used in motion a ton, and I feel like that just is one of the weak parts of his game, where he doesn't really have a release package that I ever saw, where he's having to like beat press off the line, anything like that. And I just didn't feel like he had the greatest route running. I feel like it was mostly just being more athletic than the guy across from him. So I didn't see a ton of nuance with his tempo, with his routes. He's very athletic, so he has like the ability to, sink low and snap off a route. I didn't see it as much as I would like to. So I ended up scoring him here at 6.5 for both release and route running. If it's something that he works on, and he's not just using the slot and off of jet motions, then if he can round out that area of his game, then I feel like he has a really high ceiling in the NFL. But as of right now, just what I've seen on tape, it's just something that's going to hold him back.
Okay. Jackson, I'm looking at your grades here. You have him at an 8 for release and a 7.5 for route running. So you're a good bit higher on him in these areas. Tell us what you saw there.
No, I would be interested to know, Rupert, which games that you watched. Did you watch primarily 2024 games, or did you sneak in some 2023 games as well?
I watched all the games on 2023 as well. So I watched every game that we had in the.
Because I watched the 2023 games, and that's where a lot of my score was coming from. I see what you're talking about in 2024. He has a tendency to round his routes a lot, which knocked my score for him a little bit. So I could probably honestly go down for about a 7 instead of a 7.5. But I did feel like he was super twitchy in his routes, especially at the stem of his routes. I felt like he sunk his hips well. His speed helps him a lot in his routes. So what I mean by that is the fact that I feel like he runs a better route than maybe you're giving him credit for, Rupert. Because when I was watching the film, this dude gets held in route a lot. I feel like he catches up to defenders so quickly. He gets on top of them so fast that when he gets on top of them, they have nothing to do but tug at his jersey, and it messes up his route a little bit. I saw that a ton of times when I was watching his film. I disagree. I felt like I liked his release package a lot, actually. A part of the holding problem I saw in his release package as well. He's got a nice little stutter step. He can get inside and outside leverage fairly easily, I saw. But the holding problem, if you go back and watch the film, guys are getting his hands on him all the time, which might speak a little to physicality, which is kind of what I knocked him for a little bit, I believe. Let me see. No, still gave him an 8 for physicality. But no, he gets held a lot, and I felt like that wasn't taken into account. But overall, I liked his route running.
Yeah, so I'm landing here kind of in the middle of you two. I've seen some of what both of you said. I think, Rupert, you mentioned that you saw some really nice stems on his route sometimes. And I made the same note. I said, show some really nice stems at certain moments. That, like, there are times when it's like, wow, all of a sudden he was just really snappy and twitchy because he's got the athleticism to do it, but the technique wasn't there consistently. I didn't think he had a very diverse route tree. I mean, like you said, Rupert, 100% out of the slot. I almost never saw him go outside. He ran a lot of 9 routes, some slot fades, some quick outs, some corners and posts, and then obviously a lot of hitches and screens close to the line of scrimmage because they were looking for ways to get the ball in his hands. He was their best player by far. Some crossers, not as many as I would have liked for being a big yak guy. Barely any slants, barely any comeback routes, barely any digs. I would have liked to have seen him used more in the intermediate game over the middle of the field with his yak ability. And it was like deep routes and then really like screen close to the line of scrimmage, just, nothing to it, just get the ball in his hands. So I think that's always a question, like we looked at last year with Brian Thomas Jr., where he only ran a few routes. It's like, is it because he can't do it or because he wasn't asked to do it? And we have no way of knowing as scouts. But I did note that his route tree was not super diverse.
See, I
Uh,
want to advocate for him for a little bit though,
Go ahead.
because I felt like the slants. I saw a good amount of slants and crossers as well, especially over the middle of the field. He was. There were so many times that I saw him wide open in the middle of the field, and either he just didn't get the ball thrown to him, or Brady Cook just didn't even see him wide open. He just went a totally different direction. Like quarterback play was not great last year, and I felt like, I mean, if you're just box scout, you can look at his 676 yards and be like, oh, well, he just sucked this year. Well, that's not the full picture. Like I noted so many times him being wide open where he could have caught a pass and he just wasn't targeted.
Sure, but you could say that about any receiver. I mean, there's always going to be times that a guy gets held or times that a guy's open and doesn't get targeted. Like that's
Yeah,
just
but
that's
that's what I'm saying.
playing the wide receiver position.
I know, but that's what I'm saying is to say that he can't do those certain routes. I saw those routes is what I'm saying. He just didn't get targeted when he did those routes.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying I never saw him run a crosser. I don't think it was a lot. I think when you go and look at Harmon's route diversity, whenever that comes out, where it kind of shows the tree of which ones he ran the most, I think those ones are going to be red. That would be my guess. I don't chart it like he does, but as far as like percentage of routes, he was either running downfield or he was catching a lot of screen passes. It wasn't a high percentage that he was being used in the intermediate game. And again, there's no way to know if that's because he can't do it or just because that's the system they were running and what they were asking of him. But anyway, that being said, because he was purely in the slot, I felt like he barely faced press coverage at all. Now, when he did, I saw what you saw, Jackson. It looked like he had a nice release. He was, he torched press coverage for the most part. When I actually saw him face press coverage, he torched it, which is really good and encouraging. But I mean, I watched 7 full games, something like that, and I saw like maybe 5 reps against press coverage. So I gave him a 7. I can't give him higher than a 7 on 5 reps. I'm just not going to do it. So, he did impress me with what I saw. It just wasn't something that he was asked to do almost ever. So that's kind of where I'm at with him. I gave him a 7 for a route running and a 7 for a release. It's not bad. I feel like he mostly, like Rupert said, he's mostly winning off of athleticism and not technique at this point, and was pretty limited in what I saw him do as a route runner. So that's not to say that he can't come to the NFL like a Brian Thomas Jr. and all of a sudden he's doing way more. Like this is with any prospect that you're talking about. Their role and where they land and what the coaching scheme they land in is going to play a huge factor in all of it. But anyway, so let's move on to our next trait here. We've talked about the route running for a while, which is good because it's important. So let's get into our next trait, and I believe that's ball skills. So contested catch, hands, ball tracking, body control, all of that kind of stuff. Where did you guys land on him in those areas? We'll start with you this time, Jackson.
No, I loved his ball skills. I felt like this was probably his best, outside of maybe some speed and just athleticism. This was what his second best area, probably. Loved his hands. I mean, I saw a few drops that I charted, but overall his hands were really solid. Gave him an 8 for that. Um, I noted several contested catch situations, especially around the boundary and sidelines. And this speaks to his ball tracking. I gave him a 10 for ball tracking. I thought he was, this was his best trait by far, in my opinion, was ball tracking. The way he looks at a ball, kind of charts it across the middle and catches it was elite in my mind. We got, when you look at it, try to see where it's at. I'm looking at Rupert's grades. Never mind. Yeah, when you look at like Adam Thielen, right? Kind of does some of the same things when it comes to ball tracking. So I gave him a 10 for that. One thing that I didn't feel like he did that well was catch radius. I felt like his catch radius was not amazing. I gave him a 7 for that, 7 for contested catch. I saw him do it sometimes. He made some nice one-handed catches around the border, around the sidelines and border of the field, but this wasn't an area where like I felt like he was phenomenal at. But still passable grades for me. So ball skills, probably a second best trait for me.
Okay, go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I really loved his hands. Very strong hands. Was always plucking it. Wasn't body catching. And I saw the same thing where like I thought his body control was phenomenal. To be able to like catch back shoulders, to reach behind him, grab a pass while on the run. I really liked this part of his game, and yeah, I pretty much saw it the same way Jackson did. Maybe I didn't rate him as high, but I thought his ball tracking, body control, hands were really good. Contested catch was pretty good. And then also just the catch radius with his size being under 6 foot. Just couldn't really grade him the highest there, but he made really good use of his catch radius because of his body control and ball tracking.
Yes, on the ball tracking, I gave him a 9 as well. I thought it was really good. One of the things that I noted was that there were multiple times where I saw a ball get tipped and the flight trajectory was changed, and he's still like, it's like right in front of him, and then somebody tips it, and he's got to kind of quick twitch, change where his hands are at, and adjust to the new flight path of the ball. And he did it multiple times. So I also gave him a 9 in that area. The body control, I gave an 8, and the hands an 8. Very reliable. All the things that you mentioned, like out away from his frame, consistent technique, didn't really note any drops. So yeah, I think the knock on him as far as like contested catch is just the size. I mean, he's listed at 5'10". He doesn't seem like he's got super long arms either. I mean, obviously we'll see when we get to the combine and all that. He doesn't look like a big bodied guy because he's thick. He's stout. But in terms of like tall and long, which is what you want in those contested situations and what leads to that catch radius, he just physically he's not built that way, which is okay. Not everybody has to win that way. You can still have a really high grade in our scoring system without being that guy because, again, we feel like the primary job is get open and the secondary job is catch the thing. And so if you can do those at a really high level and then also be great after the catch, which he is, and we'll talk about in a minute, then you can be really successful from a fantasy perspective without being this contested catch guy. So I have him at a 7 for a contested catch because he is physical and he does play a little bigger than his size. I think he's able to kind of box guys out and win hand fights, but a 6 for catch radius. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with him on ball skills, which I think is similar to a lot of what you guys said. So might be good at this point, kind of halfway, to just refresh everybody too. If you're new, when we're throwing out all these numbers, like a 6 is NFL average at the position. A 7 is good, better than NFL average. An 8 is like great in this area. A 9 is incredible, and a 10 is elite. So if we're sitting here saying somebody's a 7 or an 8, we're not like dogging on them or saying, oh, he stinks at this. So I feel like that's always worth mentioning, especially when you're talking about a prospect in Luther Burden that a lot of people consider elite. And they're going, wait, why are you throwing out all these 7s and 8s? Like, there's not a knock on him at all. Like, if a guy consistently had 7s and 8s across the board, he'd have a really good score when all was said and done. So just thought that was worth mentioning here, kind of at the half point of our evaluation. So want to take a quick break before we get into the rest of our eval of Luther Burden. Just let you guys know about our website. So CouchScouts.com. That is our very own website. We have some paid subscription options there for people who want more content, more resources, more tools to help you dominate Scout these rookies, nail your rookie draft. And when you nail your rookie draft, you're going to end up dominating your dynasty league if you do that year after year after year. So we've got a rookie guide that we're working on that's going to be the ultimate cheat sheet to your rookie guide with in-depth analysis on every prospect that you would even think about drafting. We are going to have we have an all 22 film room where you can get in there and study tape on guys yourself. We have IDP players, we have underclassmen, so guys that are buzz names like Jeremiah Smith or Jeremiah Love, Arch Manning. Like, you want to go in and watch and get ahead on some of those underclassmen guys. We got those in our film room. It's just a lot. Even a bonus podcast. So right after we get off of this show talking about Luther Burden, we're going to record a bonus podcast breaking out Xavier Restrepo, a little bit of a more of a sleeper wide receiver name. And if you're not a site member, you're not going to hear what we have to say about Xavier Restrepo. So check out CouchScouts.com and consider signing up for one of our packages. And right now, we actually just dropped a big film room update, and so we're running a promo. So if you use promo code FILM, FILM, you can get 20% off. I think it's 20%. Maybe it's 15%. I should have known that before I shouted it out. But use film, you're going to get some kind of discount on your membership this week. So, all right, let's move along. The next thing we're going to talk about here is his athletic profile. And so this is size, speed, agility, laterally, burst in short areas, all that kind of stuff, and how that plays out functionally for him in some of these other areas that we've talked about. And we'll start with you, Rupert. What did you notice athletically from Luther Burden?
Yeah, he's a high level athlete. Pretty much scored him 8 across the board. I went 8.5 for quickness. To me, like, every time like he has a ball in his hands, he looks like a punt returner, like one of the elite punt returners. Just being able to set guys up. He has a really strong juke. Can make guys miss one-on-one pretty much every time. And I thought this is probably like the strongest part of his game, particularly with his yak ability. Using his athleticism and setting up defenders, like he kind of knows how to create his own lanes once he gets into the open field. Really fun to watch with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I was even a little higher than you. You mentioned 8s across the board. I had him at an 8.5 for speed, a 9 for burst, and a 9 for quickness. So I feel like he's borderline elite athletically. Like, especially if he was doing this at a little bit of a bigger size, that would be even more ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, he's an explosive athlete. It jumps off, particularly like you mentioned, when he has the ball in his hands. But even as a route runner, I think you can see that explosiveness and that he's always got guys on their heels, can change direction on a dime, stop, start, lull a defender to sleep, and then hit the gas in the blink of an eye, 0 to 60 real fast. So, again, just for context, to give a guy a 10, it's like Tyreek Hill level. Okay, so he's not quite there. Me giving 9s is a very high compliment for Luther Burden, and I've got him at an 8.5 or 9 across the board for speed, burst, and quickness. What about you, Jackson?
Yeah, I'm not going to harp on it too much, what you guys said, but I gave him a 9 quickness, 9 burst, 8.5 for game speed. I gave him a 9.5 for yards after the catch. I just felt like he was so close to elite after the catch to make guys miss in a phone booth, just to break guys down in the open field. He did that borderline elite level. One thing you guys haven't mentioned that I just want to throw out there, or I guess you mentioned it earlier, Coop, but just hit the way he plays bigger than his size. I mean, he's listed at 5'11", 208. He uses every bit of those 208 pounds to his advantage. Like, he's so physical, especially in like the run blocking game. I never saw him in a matchup where somebody just ran through him. Like, he was always taking the hits, taking the fight to somebody else. Just a super physical receiver, and I like to see that for somebody of his size.
Yeah, so I do think that's a good point. When I'm talking about him and I say like for his size, I don't mean like he's this tiny guy. Like, he's not Tank Dell out there. Like 208, he is very solid, sturdy. He's built similarly to a Malik Neighbors from last year. Stocky guy, has the strength to break tackles. Like, he's not slight of frame. He's just short. Let's just call it what it is. I mean, 5'10", he's not like super short, but he's not tall either. He's built he's not built like your traditional big 6'3" plus X receiver. He's built more like a Jackson Smith and Jigba, Malik Neighbors. You could probably throw Garrett Wilson in there, although he's thicker than Garrett Wilson is. But yeah, he's got some good strength to his game. My notes for him on physicality, um, I I gave him a 7 in that area, and I could have maybe gone higher because I thought that he had really good physicality in his routes. He was really physical at the catch point, and he was a bruiser after the catch. Like, nobody wanted to try to tackle this guy because he was going to lay a hurting on you. The reason I knocked him was because I felt like for being a guy as strong as he was a pushover in the run blocking game. I just didn't think he gave a lot of effort there. I thought he was getting just thrown out of the way pretty consistently as a blocker for being as stout and strongly built as he is. I don't know, Rupert, if you noticed any of the same things there.
Yeah, effort level. I think I I don't think it's run blocking ability. I just feel like he was kind of out of the play if it was a running play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm not going to knock a guy. That doesn't even really show up in our scores. I mean, it affects my physicality score on him a little bit, but we don't have like a run blocking score for wide receivers because I don't think from a fantasy perspective it's super important. And I'll just say yards after catch, you guys mentioned your score. I gave him a 10 there. So I'm kind of burying the lead on that. Like, it's crazy to me that I haven't even mentioned it yet. I think that's his best trait. I thought every single time the ball was in his hands, he could take nothing and make it something. I saw, and there were times he was maybe even a little too confident in it, and he'd run backwards. But he always made it work because it was like between that really high level athleticism, the strength to break tackles, just the instincts, the natural ability to juke a guy out of his shoes. Seemed like he had good vision. Like, he became a running back with the ball in his hands. For me, for years, everybody was talking about the next Deebo Samuel, and nobody was, because Deebo was kind of one of one. Well, the next Deebo Samuel, I think, is finally here, and it's Luther Burden. And so, we mentioned earlier he's not the most refined route runner. Well, Deebo still isn't. However many years into his NFL career, he's still not a refined route runner, and he's made a long and productive fantasy football career and been a really good dynasty asset. So, like, if Luther Burden was Deebo but with freakish route running, like, that would be a cheat code. I don't think he's there, but maybe he could be. And even though he was only used in the slot in college, I think he's got the frame to play on the outside if he was asked to do that in the NFL. So, yeah, Luther Burden, in my mind, could be a really, really elite fantasy player. Even the way that the league is trending right now. Like, I thought Marvin Harrison Jr. was a better prospect than Malik Neighbors. But the way the league wants to use its wide receivers right now is like, get the ball in their hands and get these elite yak guys and rack up the PPR receptions. And those are like the best fantasy producers. And I think Burden, I don't think he's the route runner that Malik Neighbors was last year. But as far as like build and play style, he's much more in that Malik Neighbors archetype than like the Marvin Harrison Jr. So, yeah, I think the upside for fantasy for Luther Burden is tremendous, even if he doesn't become an elite route runner, but especially if he did become one. I'm really high on Luther Burden. I'll just real quick, as we kind of wrap up, we can kind of share our overall scores and what that means. And I'll start. So for me, he comes out to a 78.45. Which on our scoring outline puts him at the high end of a fantasy starter, borderline elite fantasy producer. And again, if he improved the route running, he could easily get into that elite fantasy producer tier. So I'm pretty high on him. Where that would stack up compared to last year, that would put him in the range of guys like Lad McConkey, who I really liked, Adonai Mitchell, who I was higher on than most, and just a couple of points below the tier of like Neighbors, Odunze. So for me, if he was just a little bit more polished as a route runner, he would have pretty easily been in that Malik Neighbors tier, but he wasn't quite there. And he didn't quite have, Malik Neighbors finished his college career with 1,600 yards. So I think the lackluster finish from a production standpoint probably impacts things a little bit too. But that's kind of where I'm at on Luther Burden. I'm still really high on him. He's probably a top 5 pick for me if I were to guess in Superflex rookie drafts at this point. We'll go to you next, Jackson.
No, I had him at an 81.43, obviously the highest on him in the entire group. That puts him right there at elite fantasy producer, and I feel really comfortable with that. He's somebody that's going to be my guy this entire process, and I know you just said he's a top 5 guy for you. When I say my guy, I'm looking at a rookie mock that the Dynasty Nerds just did middle of December. It was a Superflex rookie mock. And you look and you're going to find Luther Burden, and you have to scroll all the way down to pick 109 before Luther Burden got picked. And for all the skills that Luther Burden has on film, I mean, you guys are saying if he was a better route runner, he would be an elite fantasy producer. I don't think he's a bad route runner. I saw more than enough on film to say that this guy could be somebody that the NFL loves and uses in the same way, like you said, Cooper, as a Malik Neighbors. So if I'll, and depending on team and everything, I know how mocks are never indicative of where these guys actually go. I realize that. But if the value is still there around 108, 109, I'm going to draft Luther Burden just in about every draft. And if that requires me trading up for him or whatnot, because he's somebody that I'm going to spend this entire draft cycle pounding the table for.
Yeah, and just to be clear, neither of us said he's a bad route runner. I think you saw Malik Neighbors' positional versatility playing on the outside and the inside, and he faced press coverage a lot more. And I just saw more. I was able to feel more confident in my eval that to say he's
That's
an
fair.
elite route runner.
That's fair.
Where Luther Burden, he's a good, like 7. I gave him a 7. He's a good route runner. He's not a great route runner.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I'm technically the lowest on him, but I still really like him a lot as a player. My score came out to 75. And I like, again, just because I didn't see it in college, I couldn't really give him a good grade on it. So I could totally see a world where he comes in, I see it right away, like in the preseason or first couple games, and like he looks different. He's running routes. He's playing on the outside. Like I'm going to be, acquiring as many shares as I possibly can, even if I have to like trade away some other assets to try and go get him if I didn't draft him in rookie drafts. And then depending on landing spot, I could totally see him being like a my guy too, to where I know that this offensive scheme can really utilize him and take advantage of his yak ability. Like you said, he wasn't used a lot in the intermediate game, which I think he could thrive there. So if he goes to somewhere like the 49ers or the Dolphins, where they could really utilize him, he's going to be a guy that I'm probably going to get a lot of shares of this offseason.
Yeah, sounds good, man. And for what it's worth, I'll just give a shout out to Dynasty Nerds. You mentioned their mock draft. I actually contributed to that mock draft. I was one of the writers. I picked at 105. I was between who I took and Luther Burden. I ended up going with Travis Hunter, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a future episode. But that was a really close call for me. And then, like you mentioned, Burden ended up falling to 109, which I think partially speaks to it being a really good class as well. But I would have taken Burden as well higher than where he went in that mock personally. But it was a fun exercise, and each one of those picks on that article has some clips from our film room to give you kind of a feel for the style of that player. So definitely check out Dynasty Nerds. And if you want to get full access to the film room, which is where we do all of our tape study on rookies, you can go to dynastynerds.com and use promo code COOP to get 15% off any of your subscriptions. And it's a great resource. It's where we do all of our rookie analysis for Couch Scouts. So definitely check out Dynasty Nerds. And appreciate you guys listening to this episode, especially you guys hanging out live with us on New Year's Day. Maybe some dads home from work. I don't know. But Yeah, appreciate you guys hanging out. If you haven't already, leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, if you're on one of our other platforms, Apple, Spotify, leave us a good review. It helps people find the podcast. And definitely check out CouchScouts.com. And we will see you guys next week. Peace.